So thanks for the invitation. I was invited to talk about sprayer calibration in half an hour, which I'm sure is entirely possible given I've spent 14 years learning about it. So, I'm going to do my very best here. I'll tell you, you're asked to do something like this, and it's greatly focusing. So you end up cutting all the small talk out, or as much as I can manage. So we're going to talk about sprayer calibration, my version of it for small three-dimensional canopies, which should leave a bunch of you saying, what the heck is a small three-dimensional canopy? So let's start here first. Hey, spray person, tell us how to calibrate an Airblast sprayer. And my response is, which sprayer? This is just a few of the configurations of what we'll call an air assist three-dimensional specialty crop pesticide application machine. Isn't that wild? They're all trying to do the same thing in different ways. And the advice that I would give somebody that owns the sprayer in the top left would be completely different from the advice I would tell the person who owns the sprayer in the bottom right. The design matters. Also, so does what you're trying to achieve. This is what I consider a large three-dimensional canopy. On your left, you've got citrus. On your right, you've got almond, although it could be any tree nut. These are big, big canopies. Medium, you could argue it, but semi-dwarf orchard, densified orchards, I would consider those medium. Anything about 11 feet and below, depending on the thickness, they take a very different way to spray. And then finally, I once caught a fish this big. We've got what I consider a small canopy, and even that's relative. We could be talking about cane fruit or high bush blueberry or grapes. So when I talk about calibration, it might surprise you how much of it has nothing to do with nozzles, given my occupation. Air handling is the most important and least understood system on a sprayer. It's tough, but it will make or break every single Airblast application. So let's start by considering what's our objective here. And yeah, a lot of these pictures I drew have trees in them, but a canopy is a canopy is a canopy when it's small. We want droplet-laden air to push the air in a canopy out of the canopy. That's what I would call an effective alternate row strategy. You'd push all that stagnant air out from one side and replace it with spray-laden air. Now, I am making some assumptions here that the grape applicators here are using air-assisted sprayers. You may not be, but I am a big fan of air, and hopefully I can convince you before we're done. Actually, it's the drawing in the middle that's my absolute favorite. This means you're driving every single row, and your job is just, I'm sorry, that's not right at all. The bottom is my favorite. See, I got to warm up. You actually made an error if you do the one in the middle. It means you've pushed your spray too far past your target. At the bottom, that's the one I like. I like you driving every row and you shove that spray about halfway in. And then when you come up the other side, there's some overlap in the middle and you've essentially covered the whole canopy. That's the objective. And yet I still meet people that do this all the time. This is a nursery operation where they're trying to slam spray through 5 rows. These are cedars. We use cedars as windbreaks to stop pesticide drift and dust and noise. And I always get sprayer guys coming up to me going, how come I can't push spray through 5 rows of this? Why do you think you're using them as a drift block? They don't let things through. You can't just take a bite that big. For anyone that's an alternate row applicator trying to shove spray through multiple rows, you will always do this. You'll get excessive coverage next to the sprayer and sporadic coverage the further out you go. How big a bite you're able to take will depend on wind conditions, how dry the air is, and a few other factors. But the take home here is the further you try to get spray to go, the more unpredictable it gets. Now, as I'm sort of building up all the components to this, also understand the canopy management plays a gigantic role. If you can't see through your canopy, we call it optical porosity because we like to use big words, but put it this way, if your droplet can't see the target, it's going to be a difficult target to hit. So having some air channels in the canopy, giving it some space, either by hedging or pruning, makes a big deal to spray coverage. So let's go through this as a series of steps. Step 1, I hope your sprayer is working. I mean, it seems pedantic and obvious, but you haul a sprayer out of long-term winter storage. If you expect it to work the way it was when you put it away, you could be in for a rude awakening. things rot, they fill up with detritus and garbage, things seize, mice like to move in. Don't assume that the sprayer you put away is the same one you're going to take out. And after you've done your seasonal maintenance, your startup process, think about giving your sprayer a quick walk around every day. It's just like a long-term or a long-range hauler. If you're going to walk your truck every morning with a checklist to make sure everything's hunky-dory before you start off, I think you should be doing that with the sprayer too. And I've got some checklists that are really very small, like an 8 or 10 checklist. You can do the walk while you're filling the thing, but I do recommend that you do this 10-point checklist and just walk it to make sure it's not going to break down halfway through the day. You just never know what you're going to find in there. A buddy of mine was an aerial applicator. They went off for a nice long government lunch. And when they came back to their plane, they found a bird had built a nest on the engine. This took about an hour and a half. You just never know what you're going to find. Do the walk around. Step 2, park your sprayer in an alley between 2 rows and tie a few 10-inch lengths of ribbon along the air outlet. And then you have a friend stand behind the sprayer where it's safe. They can watch the business end. Somebody goes to the tractor and starts the fan. You're not driving, you're not spraying, you're just blowing. And why would you do such a silly thing? Well, these ribbons are way too long. They're also flagging tape. And if you do this with flagging tape, and if you have a sprayer with a particularly strong fan, what's going to happen is they're going to stretch out, get caught in the air intake, and blow confetti all over the vineyard. And I've done this in an orchard, and while it's very pretty, it's not very informative. So, do use shorter, stronger lengths of ribbon. Stand behind the sprayer and have a look. Right between these white hashed lines, that's where you want your air to go, and eventually your spray. Everything above that zone is a waste of money, a cause for drift, basically just not worth it. So you want to kind of compress your air into those 2 wedges on either side. And you can see those little weeny deflectors, those little metal sticks at the top of the outlet. They're almost decorative at this length. They're hardly useful. They do have some small utility, but I highly recommend nice long deflectors on the top. And at the bottom left and bottom right behind the wheels, you see 2 more deflectors. That's about as big as you can get them. You don't want them to stick out beyond the tires. And you can see that they do something, because the deflector on the left is aimed down a bit and the deflector on the right is aimed up a bit. And this may be hard without me pointing, but look how the ribbons correspond to the white dotted lines. On the left, they line right up. On the right, that deflector is pushing the air up and shoving the ribbon a little higher. So those deflectors do a great job of compressing and directing your air. It may be the only way you can do it. So do invest in deflectors if you're using an axial Airblast sprayer like this design. So where do you aim them? Well, you want the tops to just overshoot the top of your tallest canopy. And I'm just as concerned about drift as the next guy, but I'm also concerned about you getting the job done. And if you don't overshoot your canopy a little bit, you could cause trouble. I'll get into that in a minute. It's actually less important to hit the very bottom of the canopy. In fact, my secret retirement plan is to one day go to everybody's farms and say, how'd you like me to save you, I don't know, 10, 15% of your annual pesticide bill? And of course, everyone will say, heck yeah. How are you going to do it? Nope, don't ask me questions. Just, I'll tell you what, I'll save you 10% of your annual pesticide bill. You give me 20% of what you save. Is that a deal? Oh, of course that's a deal. And then I just shut off the bottom 2 nozzles, 1 on each side. And everybody gets mad because they think it's a cop-out or a magic trick. But truth be told, so many growers are just spraying into the ground when they don't need to. So aim that bottom deflector just a smidge higher than the bottom. Don't worry about it. Pesticide is made up of a bunch of small droplets that like to fall with gravity. And secondary deposition, which is what happens as pesticide settles, will occur on all the upward facing surfaces. The very bottom of the canopy is not the critical bit. It's the top of the canopy. And you can see that here. Let's say you're using a tower sprayer and you're not on even ground. Well, as the sprayer kind of rocks back and forth, yeah, the bottom of it might miss the bottom of the canopy, but we've just established it's actually really hard to miss it, even if you're not aimed directly at it. But at the top right specifically, as this tower sprayer tips a little bit, If you were stingy at the top of your canopy, you're going to miss it. And the tippy top of the canopy is one of those critical points where you do tend to find insect and disease more prevalent because it's just not as consistent for hitting it. So I'll beat this horse to death. Hit the top, overshoot it a bit. Don't get too freaked out about the bottom. Step 4. Now that you've tied ribbons all over your sprayer, and it's gorgeous, you've set up your air and you know where it's going. Now we're going to do the same thing to the canopy itself. Go to the upwind and far side of your tree or your panel of grapes or your berries, doesn't matter. And tie 3 ribbons, 2 at least, 1 at the top and 1 along the widest portion of the canopy. And now with your tank half full of water, not because you're spraying, but because we're trying to establish a travel speed, drive past that tree or that panel of grapes or that berry bush, drive past it in your spraying gear at your ideal RPMs with the air on. Again, no spray, just air. And have a partner standing on the far side and watch those ribbons like a hawk. And here's what you're going to see. And by the way, of course, your partner's wearing safety glasses so they don't get hit in the face by whatever the heck the sprayer is blowing. Be smart. You're going to watch to see what those ribbons do. If those ribbons hang limp, then you're not providing enough air energy for that spray to penetrate the canopy and pass through. Now, we established in the first slide, maybe the objective isn't to go all the way through the canopy, it's just to get to about halfway. Nevertheless, we do want to see them wiggle just a little bit because wherever the air goes from that sprayer, it is carrying spray with it. So just a little waft as the sprayer drives by is ideal, about 30%. If they start to stick straight out as you drive by, and remember, the wind is blowing into them, so you're not only overcoming the distance to the canopy and the canopy density, you're also overcoming the wind. If they stand straight out into the wind, you're just blowing too hard, and all your pesticide is flying through and past the canopy. In fact, it could probably be doing difficult things to your canopy you might not realize. You're forcing spray into channels, or you're causing leaves to realign and just expose their thin surface. You can just blow product through a canopy and still miss most of it. It's amazing. The spray just slipstreams over the surfaces. This is what I was talking about because I forgot I added this slide. Would have been really nice just to show you and say all that, but here it is again. You could be causing your spray to channel, which is what's happening on the left. Or if you hit those leaves dead on, those big floppy grape leaves, they could slam shut and protect each other's halves, inner sides, or even align with the air and miss. For those of you that are using multi-row sprayers, things get a smidge trickier. I've got 2 different designs of sprayer here. One is one that uses laminar air, like an air curtain. Those are the top 3. And the bottom is one that uses multiple axial through fans. That's the bottom 3. And how you orient those fans could really make or break your spray application. In A, we've got 2 fans, laminar flow, so nice straight sheets of air, slamming directly into one another. And when that happens, it's like 2 people running at each other head first. They're just going to slam into each other and bounce off in weird directions. It's not an effective way to spray. I've done this in orchards, I've done this in vineyards, and I've got colleagues that have done it all over the world. Don't aim laminar air directly at laminar air. Do what you see in B, have them separated in space on the y-axis, or in C, aim one forward and aim one back, or aim them both back a little bit, or aim them both forward, anything but dead on. Now, if you're using axial fans, they have a much wider swath. They create a big air wash is another word for it. And it doesn't move very far, but it's very turbulent. So you want those fans aimed square directly onto the panel or the tree. And it's okay if they're aimed at one another because it's such turbulent, wildly moving air, and it doesn't move quite in the same straight lines that it tends to mess with itself in the middle of the canopy and move in unpredictable directions, which we like. That's when the spray starts to disperse and land all over the place. Sure, you can aim them a little bit back. That's no big deal. That's E, but try not to aim axial fans forward. What happens is it runs out of air energy and just washes around the outside. Step 5. Let's say you don't like what you saw on those ribbons. What do you do about it? Well, you've got choices. You all have different operations. You all have different sprayers, different weather conditions, and different pressures. Some of you might be willing to drive faster or slower. Some might not. Some may have a sprayer where you can change your fan speed. Some don't. So here's what you can do. First, consider changing your fan gear, high or low. If you crank it into high, the ribbons will stand straight out. If you lower the gear, they'll sag a bit. But here's something that nobody thinks about, and that's the travel speed of the sprayer itself. This is a tremendous tool for spray coverage. It's not just to help you get the job done faster, it's there to help move the air correctly. If you slow down, you're going to end up with more air focused on the canopy. Think about this. Imagine you're holding a hose and it's spraying and you run full tilt past somebody. You're going to hit them, but you're just going to kind of spritz them as you go by. Now imagine slowing down to a near crawl. You're focusing that liquid on that person so much longer, you're going to drench them. It's the same with air. If you zip past, you're not giving the air an opportunity to get to and get into a canopy. Likewise, if you slow down, you're going to concentrate that air energy. It becomes additive and it's going to force itself through. Here's a great way to look at it. On the left, with an axial sprayer, if you slow down the sprayer, the air will go deeper and higher. That's your dwell time. If you speed up the sprayer, it'll bend back. It won't penetrate as deeply and it won't go as high. So you can use travel speed as a tool to improve air penetration and therein improve coverage. There are those situations where you can do something called gear up and throttle down. You might be familiar with this. If you have a sprayer that's a positive displacement pump, like a piston diaphragm, you can drop your PTO speed from 540 to say, I don't know, 340 or so, as long as you're not crawling up and down hills and lugging. And what that can do is slow your fan down without changing your spray pressure. So in doing this, you're able to separate your fan speed from your hydraulic system, which is how much liquid's coming out of the nozzles. It's a neat little trick. If it's available to you, it's worth experimenting with. So what do we got at this point? We've got a sprayer that's now got the air aimed, and we've controlled how much air is getting into the canopy, probably by changing fan gear, but also maybe by changing travel speed. So whatever travel speed you've ended up with that's making the ribbons move correctly, that's your new driving speed. As long as the wind doesn't change or the canopy doesn't get twice as dense, that's your new travel speed. And if you don't trust your tachometer, which maybe you shouldn't, some tractors don't display the right one, grab your smartphone or your runner's watch or whatever you've got that's got an accelerometer on it and a speedometer, and check it out. Step 6. And I probably should move this forward now that I think about it, but you really should only ever calibrate a sprayer in conditions that you're going to spray in. What is the point of setting your sprayer up beautifully in a tornado? It's not your typical situation. And I guess it's particular to this part of the calibration that it really, really matters, because this is where we start looking at the actual spray coverage. And just to pin this down, to really underpin this, I did a calibration years ago in actually a pretty large orchard, and it was threatening to rain, like the skies were black, but we had everybody out and we knew we were going to do this thing. The air was super humid, high pressure, low wind. We put water sensitive paper out in the tree and we did a pass, and then it started to rain. We gathered up these water sensitive papers and we just called it. And then after a torrential rain for like an hour, it just stopped. It was just one of those days. Sun came out, suddenly it's hot, it's dry. You couldn't believe it even rained. So I got a hold of these guys. I said, let's just finish up. We put the water sensitive paper right back in the same spots we had before, and we sprayed again. And they looked absolutely nothing like the first set, because it was no longer super humid out, because it was now bone dry. It really, really matters. You'd swear we had done something different with the sprayer. All that changed was the weather. So how do we do this important step? We use water sensitive paper. If you forget everything that I've said during this talk, at least please remember that. Go get yourself a bag of 50 pieces. You can do the stuff that's made by Syngenta, which T-Jet and a lot of other people sell. Or right there in the States is another company called Spot On. They make a really great brand of water sensitive paper. Or if you're feeling like being exotic, Brazil now makes one called WS Paper. And I've tested all three of these. And for the grower that wants to look at their coverage, all three are pretty much the same thing. So get whatever you like, but get something. And here's what you do with it. You open up the bag and beware of the fact that your fingers are greasy and wet, and this stuff responds to moisture. The backs don't, they're just paper. And I didn't say this when we started, but I work for the government, so I'm super cheap. And I like to fold these so that I get it water sensitive on both sides. It's kind of important if you're interested in underleaf coverage, or maybe relative to the sprayer, if you want to see what's happening on the back of the paper. Very informative. So what you're going to do is fold 20 of these things and just pop a pin in the corner. And it looks like close-up magic, but you really do get a feel for how to do this. I drop a bunch of them in a Ziploc bag, and then I pin them in the canopy. I use 10 dark pins and 10 light pins. The dark pins get pinned inside the depths of the canopy, and the lighter ones get pinned to the outside. Orient them however you like, aiming any which way you like. And then spray, and then retrieve them. And if the coverage is excessive, and by which I mean they're just completely blue, you've got too much. If they're completely missed, you don't have enough. The trick is to know how much is just enough, but we'll get to that. The point is, if they're all blue, you're using way too much flow. If they're all yellow, you need more. I don't like changing pressure as a tool for doing this. It's very unpredictable. It's better just to buy a better set of nozzles. Go to a lower rate or go to a higher rate, whatever you need based on what the paper is telling you. And what's the paper telling you? Well, you just stuff 20 of these out into your vineyard. You'll be lucky if you find 18 of them. It's amazing how they hide. I like to wrap little bits of ribbon. I love ribbon all around the thing so I can find them again, use flagging tape. Everything in the center here, 85 drops per square centimeter, 10 to 15% coverage. If you can get that on 80% of your papers, you're laughing. Doesn't matter if it's a systemic, contact, it doesn't matter. That is sufficient coverage for almost any situation, save a drench. If your papers look anything like the 4 in the middle, you win. It's kind of a strange thing to draw a line in the sand like that, and real persnickety people start to pick that apart, but we have never had a problem with it. And using this number, 85 drops per square centimeter, 10 to 15% coverage on 80% of the papers, we've used this worldwide. It's one number to remember. And once you start looking for it, you get really good at it. The papers on the left, it's not so much about what got there, but looking at the size of the gaps between the drops. Could a fly get in between there? Could an aphid get between there? Could some matter of disease get in between there? Heck yeah. But good luck with the middle 4 and beyond. And just a caveat, water-sensitive paper is not a plant. It doesn't behave like a plant. Liquid doesn't spread on it like a plant. And it also doesn't tell you some of the things that are going to happen on, say, grape. The fruit is 3 to 4 times harder to get spray coverage on than, say, the leaves. This kale and clay spray, some of you may recognize if you've ever done it. You've got to use slightly finer droplets and be a little more careful about how much spray is oriented on the fruiting zone when you're looking to protect your grapes. The leaves are super easy. The grapes are a bit trickier. So when you're using water-sensitive paper, just recognize that it's sort of a worst-case scenario. Unless we're talking about fruit, the fruit are a little trickier. One last little caveat. When you're doing this, recognize that the papers on the outside, well, that's how the spray gets into the canopy, right? So you're probably going to drench those on their way to the center. It's unavoidable and it's okay. We just don't want stuff dripping all over the place. That's just a waste. And you can see from this diagram, this is called Canopy Indexing. It's kind of a cool way to think about the relative distribution of spray in your canopy. It's got its faults, but it does paint a good picture. At the bottom right, you can see that because that part of this plant is closest to the Airblast sprayer, and we validated this in so many different crops, you can expect to get about 3 times the deposit in that corner versus, say, the top left, where you'd be lucky if you got, a tenth of the spray, not even a tenth, 0.1. Look at how that distributes, and it should make sense in the back of your head. This is also why it's so important to spray from both sides. Even if you're managing to get some spray to the far end, it may not be sufficient for protection. In fact, it rarely is. And if the wind is blowing from that direction, it's even more difficult to manage. So this is what your plant sees when you drive by. It's, I hope, reason enough for you to consider driving every row. and recognize that if you get the kind of coverage you're looking for in the middle of the crop, that's a win. Don't be quite so bent out of shape if you drench the exterior to do it. Step 7, your plants grow, they change. So as your crop grows and fills, you might have to reassess some of your settings. That way you can reflect a larger, denser canopy. Now, the way I like to do this, and it's super easy, slow down. If you slow down a little bit, you do half a dozen different things. You focus your air on the canopy a bit longer, which is great because the canopy is denser and might need a bit of a more of a shove. You've also increased your spray volume a little bit, so mind your rates. But now you're focusing spray itself on the crop a bit longer. And that should make up for the fact that there's more crop to protect. So that's a really great tool, and it's a strategy you can use, and you should confirm it with water-sensitive paper. But sometimes you might want to go the other way around. For early season orchards, for example, there are no leaves on the trees during the spring. We've all noticed that, or they're just starting. So wind tends to whip through a planting pretty good, and you always seem to be fighting it, and you tend to lose a lot of your spray because of it. As the canopy grows and fills in, they become a natural air brake. So suddenly a lot more of your spray starts to land, which means it becomes something of a self-correcting problem. The only way you can know which of these two situations works best is to use the water-sensitive paper and be attentive. If you have to spray a little extra early in the season to get it done, look for wet wood and watch your water-sensitive papers, and then see when your spray gets a bit thin and decide, should I slow down a bit? What do I need to do? Or, I still seem to be getting great coverage. I'm just going to accept some of the early season losses as the cost of doing business. Just an extreme example of how a crop can change over time. I love hops. This is hops. You can expect hops to grow on a good day 6 inches, which is phenomenal. So imagine how much you've got to change your sprayer from day to day. It's a real thing. So wow, talk about a crash course in calibration, everything you never wanted to know. And I don't expect you to remember all of that. So I'm going to offer you a resource. During the worst of COVID, when it first started, I always had this idea I was going to rewrite my Airblast 101 book, which honestly was written for the Southern Ontario experience. But I got a hold of a couple of colleagues and I said, join me in this. Let's make this global. Let's make it all crops. Let's make it all makes and models of sprayers, the ultimate handbook in spraying specialty crops with Airblast. And they agreed. And wow, it just took forever, but I'm awfully proud of it. And it's free. You can go to my website, Sprayers 101, which is also nonprofit, and grab a copy of the book. If you prefer paper, which I do, you can do print on demand. Again, we don't make a cent. We just charge what it costs to print it and send it to you. And I highly recommend you pick it up. It'll answer a lot of questions. And that website was Sprayers 101, which I run with a colleague. Over 350 different articles, videos, downloadable calculators. We've even got comic books on there. It's crazy. It's all kinds of great information to help you be more productive, more effective, and a safer applicator. So that's it for me. I'll take any questions if there's time. If not, please do check out these resources.
Thank you, Jason.
My pleasure.
Anybody have a quick question?
On the Airblast sprayer, does it make a difference, flat fan or cone?
Nope. How's that? The angle that the nozzle hits the air causes something called shear. I've seen gorgeous jobs done with flat fans. I've seen gorgeous jobs done with hollow cone. It really doesn't matter. There's some interesting flat fans coming out with like a 30-degree angle. They're supposed to jet right into the fruiting zone, but I've seen no data on that yet. It just seems like a kind of a good idea. Your best bet is to spend 80% or 90% of your time getting the air right, and whatever kind of droplets or fan shape you make with your nozzles, it just gets all chewed up by the air and redistributed. Kind of doesn't matter.
Anything else? Otherwise, if you go to our website and you go to his speaker profile, there's send a message. You can click that and the message will go right to him. And so, very good. Good, Jason. Thank you.
Bye, everybody.